Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this wet morning. Sorry to be online again. So, the schedule had originally had us being at the center today in Bangalore, but due to the weather situation, we're online instead. And I'm very happy to be able to be here with all of you, even if it's just digitally. I will say that it's raining here at Sarah as well, and we haven't had power. I'm on battery, so I might disappear. Who knows? If I disappear, because we lose power, I will switch to my phone. There are backups in place, okay? But so we know we're doing the best we can. I will say with that in mind, I thought maybe today we would end at noon instead of 12:30. Usually we go to 12:30, but we take a 15 to 20-minute break near the end, and that's hard to do online anyway. When you're online in an online teaching or a meeting or anything, to take a break and then come back is difficult. So I thought today we'll just end at noon instead, but we won't have any breaks. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and start. Let's start by creating a sacred space for ourselves. Recognize that we've come together today to study the teachings of the Buddha, to learn how to practice the Dharma. And so we want to take any of our worldly experience throughout the day, whatever we have been doing this morning that's been occupying our time or our mind or our energy, we put that to the side to allow us to focus on our time together here, studying and practicing and contemplating the teachings of the Buddha and how to implement them into our lives to make our lives more fulfilling and to make our lives more peaceful and content. And so we create a sacred space for ourselves wherever we are, whether we are in our office or in our living room, in our kitchen, whether we're on a phone or a laptop, whatever it may be. We try to create a nice bubble of sacred space around ourselves. And the truth is about our Dharma practice, our spiritual practice, is that the goal is to be living a spiritual life all the time. So we shouldn't have to create a sacred space. We shouldn't have to create this distinction between our everyday life and our spiritual life. That's the goal. We're aiming for it. That's what we're looking toward doing. But until we get to that point where our spiritual life and our everyday life are perfectly merged, then it's useful to create a parameter for ourselves. So we'll start by doing that and setting a strong intention that we have come together today for the purpose of studying the Dharma. And we do this not for our own benefit alone, but for the benefit of all sentient beings. We recognize that in order to be of the most service to other sentient beings, we need to improve our own minds, improve our own hearts, and walk the path towards Buddhahood, because that will create for us the greatest opportunity to be of service. We'll increase our own wisdom and our own skillful means, and by doing so, then we can be of maximum benefit to others. So, as we come together today, as we study, as we practice, we aren't doing that just for our own benefit, but so that we might be of greater benefit to others. So, set that strong intention in your mind. And to help kind of secure that intention, that virtuous act at the beginning of our practice, we will recite a few prayers. So they should be on screen. We'll start with reciting Refuge and Bodhicitta 3 times in Tibetan and then once in English. And then we'll continue with a few others in English. Sangye churan soki chonam la janchu paru dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi drola penche sangye drupar shok sangye churan soki chonam la janchu paru dagni kyabsu chi Dagi jinsogi pe sonamgi drola pinche sange drupa shok sange chiran soki chonam la chanchu paru dagni kyabsuji dagi jinsogi pe sonamgi drola pinche sange drupa shok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence, and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. We'll offer a short mandala offering, once in Tibetan and once in English. This is to request the teachings and also to request the blessings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Sashi Juixing Meito Ni de Sange Shindo Mikte Oi Choku Namandan Shingla Shiparsho. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. And we'll offer lastly the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, the founder. This praise celebrates all of the good qualities of the Buddha that we are trying to emulate, trying to instill in our own minds. Celebrates the good qualities of the Dharma and the Sangha, so all three jewels of refuge. And it encompasses all of the teachings of the Buddha in this short praise. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who were wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, forms supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. the Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. To those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Great. Thank you. So, as I mentioned before, welcome. Thank you for being here on this rainy morning. I haven't done any Sunday morning teachings in a while, so I thought it'd be good to remind ourselves of the appropriate mindset we should take whenever we engage in studying the Dharma, whether that is studying in a group or studying on our own. And really, this is a mindset we should take whenever we're engaging in any activity in the world, but it's explicitly taught how to be a proper student in the Lam Rim. This is where this is taught. And so the main way this is taught through the analogy of a pot or a water pot, that a vessel to contain water. And we try to avoid the three faults of a faulty vessel. And by avoiding those three faults, it allows us to be more present with the teachings, make ourselves more open. So what are those three faults? We first want to avoid being like a pot that is turned upside down. So if a pot is turned upside down, no matter how much water you pour onto it, it'll never be filled with water, right? And so in that same way, we want to avoid being closed-minded. When we attend a teaching, when we are learning something new, whether it be Dharma or non-Dharma, we want to be open-minded. We want to be receptive. We want to be able to hear the teachings, okay? And so we want to avoid that first fault of being like a pot that's upside down. The second fault is we want to avoid being like a pot that has a hole in it. So no matter how much water you pour into a pot, if it has a hole in it, it'll always leak out and be empty. In that same way, we want to be attentive. We want to be mindful. We want to be aware while we are engaging in study, right? So that means when we're here together, we are attentive to each other and attentive to whoever's speaking, whether that be someone asking a question or whether it be the teacher. When we're studying on our own, it means we don't want to be studying when we're sleepy or we're not paying attention. We want to avoid as many distractions as we can. So we want to avoid the fault of being like a pot that has a hole in it, that whatever information that comes in one ear goes out the other. And then the third fault we want to avoid is we want to avoid being like a pot that is stained on the inside. So if you haven't cleaned out the pot before it is filled up, then even if it's filled up with perfectly pure, clear water, that water is going to be tainted by whatever was in it beforehand. So in the same way, we don't want to come to a teaching with preconceptions or with a prejudiced mind, saying, I know this topic already, I don't need to learn this, whether it be because I learned it somewhere else or it's not important for my life or any of these things. If we come into a teaching or into learning a new topic with a prejudiced mind, then we're never going to be open to receiving the benefit of that topic. So these are the three faults we want to avoid. We want to cultivate their opposite. Instead of being like an upside down pot, we want to be open-minded and receptive and aware. Instead of being like a pot with a hole in it, we want to be mindful and attentive and have some energy towards whatever we're studying. And instead of being like a pot that is stained with some sort of poison, we want to be not only open-minded, but not have any prejudice or any predispositions going into a teaching. So try to cultivate these qualities as we spend our time together now, but also they're important to cultivate all the time. Whenever you're engaging in any new topic, You want to go into it open-minded. You want to be aware and attentive, and you don't want to bring baggage with you. Okay? You want to give it a chance, whatever it may be. If after studying that topic for a while and understanding it well, then you say, maybe this isn't for me or this isn't useful, that's okay. It's okay to be critical, right? It's okay to have a critical mind analyzing whatever it is you're studying. Again, whether it be worldly or Dharma, but you have to go in with an open mind without any pre-existing baggage as best you can. So let's try to cultivate those qualities. I mentioned before we started the prayers, when I was talking about creating a sacred space, part of the goal of our Sunday series, How to Be Happy, Practical Everyday Buddhist Wisdom for Everyday Life, is we want to learn how to make every moment of our life Dharma, or make every moment of our life part of our spiritual practice. That should be our goal, okay? And that's a long-term goal. It doesn't happen overnight. But the goal should be everything we do is Dharma. Whether that be our worldly activities, our chores, our work, dealing with family, doing whatever it is, driving in traffic, it should still be part of our spiritual practice. So I've been thinking about that this week. And what has been coming up for me is the fact that sometimes we have to work to make our practice joyful. But the practice of Dharma should always be joyful, right? And so I wanted to look at why is it sometimes that it feels like engaging in a spiritual practice is a chore? Why does it feel like it's effort we don't want to put into it? And so, quick story. I was at debate the other day, and one of my classmates was telling me about a friend of his who came from the same area as him. And he had left and gone to some other place. He had moved away. And when a friend had gone to visit him, he was no longer Buddhist. He had said he was Christian now. And his friend said, "Why are you not Buddhist anymore? What do you mean?" And he goes, "Oh, well, if I'm Buddhist, then I have to worry about caring about other people and I have to worry about karma. But as a Christian, all I have to do is pray to God and then everything's fine." Which is obviously a misunderstanding of a lot of Christian teachings, okay? But it's true that sometimes it feels like we have to do a lot of work, right? Because once you understand something, then you have to then put that thing into practice. And if doing that is a burden, then why not look for an easy way out? Okay. Now, I know a lot of really wonderful Christians who would say it's not that easy. You're still expected to be a good person. Just simply praying isn't going to be enough to overcome the faults of human character. But that's this idea we have. We want to take the easy way out sometimes. And sometimes it feels like a burden. We know the right thing to do in a situation, right? We understand that whether it's because we understand the law of karma, we understand cause and effect, or we just have a strong sense of morality or caring for others, we know the right thing to do, yet we still want to give into our anger sometimes, right? We still want to give into our pettiness, into our attachment. We know these things aren't going to benefit us, but in the moment, we just want to give into them, even being aware that they're going to harm us in the long run, that they're not beneficial. We have that instinct. Another thing that got me thinking about this is I have a song lyric that's been stuck in my head all week. I often talk about how I try to bring my practices Dharma to everything I do, including engaging in pop culture. So there was a song I was listening to, and one lyric jumped out at me, and it's been sticking in my head all week. And the song itself is about addiction and recovery, and someone having self-destructive thoughts. So that topic isn't something I relate to. But this one lyric, it says, "I know I said I was out of the woods, but I left a key under the mat for the wolves." This idea that we think we have found safety, yet we always leave that door open. We always leave that door open because we always want a little bit of suffering. We invite it back into our lives. Even if we do things that put us on a path towards happiness and joy and feeling complete, feeling content, we always have that little part of our mind that says, maybe I'll run towards that thing that is dangerous. Maybe I will run towards that thing that is destructive. Why do we do that? Right? That is the question. And how can we engage in a spiritual practice that avoids that, but doesn't feel like it's work, doesn't feel like a chore, instead feels like a natural way to live in the world that brings us joy all the time? Now, we'd say that the reason we do that, the reason we turn towards suffering instead of towards liberation, is because we have these habits that we've accumulated, not just in this life, but in previous lifetimes. Again and again, we have been following the self-grasping mind and the self-cherishing mind. And the self-grasping mind, the mind that says that I am truly existent and everything is exactly as it appears to me, that it truly exists in the way that my limited ability to perceive it perceives it. That self-grasping mind and the self-cherishing mind that says my happiness, or what I perceive as happiness, is more important than anyone else's happiness. Those two minds have created a system of bad habits, and they've become so ingrained in us that we don't realize that we are engaging in these harmful activities. And so, since those become our status quo, then anything we do to disrupt them is going to feel like it is work. It is going to take effort. And at the beginning of our practice, and by the beginning, I mean for a lot of our practice, it is going to take effort. It is not going to be effortless. But the truth is, the more we practice, the more effortless it becomes. So, even though it seems like it is difficult sometimes to do the right thing, and by the right thing, I mean following a spiritual path, living a spiritual life. When we put in the effort, we're able to realize not only that it gets easier and easier, but that the joy we experience by leading a spiritual life becomes greater and greater. So, what we need to learn how to do is to transform our worldly activities into spiritual activities and do so in such a way that we allow it to bring joy to our life and not feel like an obligation or a burden, right? And so, what we're doing when we abandon these bad habits is we're not abandoning joy. We're not abandoning fun. We're not abandoning having a good time. We're abandoning samsara. We're abandoning these negative habits that only harm ourselves and others in the long run. Now, it's important, I'd say, that we don't gaslight ourselves, right? So, when you make a decision and you know it's the right decision, but you still, it's hard to make, you don't be like, no, I'm enjoying this. I'm really happy. I'm really having a good time. This is what I want to be doing, right? You don't just gaslight yourself and pretend that you're happy when you're not. Okay, that's not what this is about. This is about dedicating your life to recognizing that all of your actions are going to have consequences, immediate consequences and consequences in the future. And when you realize that, and you realize that your experience of happiness is not based on external circumstances, but on the mind that reacts to those external circumstances, then you don't have to force this sense of joy, because engaging in spiritually moral behavior, engaging in a spiritual path, regardless of your activity, is going to automatically bring joy. Okay? Because you realize what you're doing is you are essentially putting in a deposit, for your future happiness and for the future happiness of all others. And that in and of itself brings about a sense of contentment. And so it's easy to say, right? What is the methodology to go about doing this? I think so. There are a couple of things we'll talk about today, but the heart of it is, at least in terms of praxis, right? We need to adopt the threefold practice of what we call studying, contemplating, and meditating. Studying or hearing is the first step. So whenever we're engaging in a new topic or new material, we have to go through the process of actively learning it, whether that means coming to a teaching like this, or whether it means studying in a text, or whatever it may mean. That first step is important, right? That things don't come to our minds sui generis. We have to do the work of learning new material, learning what it means to understand the law of karma, of cause and effect, learning what it means to see all the disadvantages to self-cherishing and all of the advantages to cherishing others more than yourself. We have to study that, right? And there are millennia's worth of teachings giving us examples and giving us guidance on how to study these material. So we have to study first, study or hearing. That's the first step. But then once we have all this new material, we have to then engage in what's called contemplation. And this is to some extent the most important part for a lot of us. Contemplation is becoming convinced in the validity of whatever it is that you're studying. Recognizing all of the potential mistakes and the potential pitfalls, and then seeing, does this make sense to me? When I say that it's important to lead my whole life with compassion, that if compassion is the guiding principle by which I do everything, that's going to make every one of my activities more powerful and more fulfilling for myself and others. Do I really believe that? How does that work? What does that do to my mind if I actually believe that? So we have to become convinced of it. So that is the act of contemplation, of the act of questioning what you've learned and becoming convinced of the validity of it. And then once you have that conviction, then you engage in meditation. And so meditation, in Tibetan, the word for meditation, gom, means to become familiar with something. So when we are becoming familiar with something, when we're meditating on something, what we're doing is making that topic, whatever it may be, whether it be impermanence and death, like we talked about at our class last night, or compassion, bodhicitta, or renunciation, or any of the topics that we study. When we meditate on it, what we're doing is making it inseparable from our mind. It's the act of meditation that actually makes all of our activities a spiritual practice. There's an irony there, right? Because what we're constantly trying to do is to make our spiritual practice exist outside of our meditation cushion, outside of the gompa or of the temple, right? We don't want to only have a spiritual practice when we're attending a teaching or when we're doing our daily meditation. We want to have a spiritual practice all the time. But in order for that to happen, we have to do the work on the meditation cushion. We can't just learn this material and expect it to stick with us all the time, to become second nature, just by learning it. We have to learn it, then we have to be convinced of it, even if it's taught by someone who we trust. We can't have blind faith, because that blind faith is never going to be as stable as conviction that comes from your own study. So first we have to learn it, then we have to study and contemplate and make sure we believe it, and then we actually have to do the work to meditate on it. We actually have to do the work to make these ideals that we believe in, the spiritual practice that we find so important at an intellectual level, we have to make it real at an emotional level. That's where the act of meditating comes in. So we have to do that in our daily meditation sessions. We have to do that when we attend temple, when we attend the Gompa teachings like this. And by doing that, by engaging in that meditation, then those practices, those ideas, leave the meditation room and stay with us through all of our activities. So that's the goal. But we need to do the meditation in order to make our minds inseparable from those ideals. So study, contemplation, and meditation, if we take those three and apply them to all aspects of our life, I think there are a lot of benefit. There's a lot of results that we'll see. And that second one is quite important. We have to develop conviction, right? We have to understand why these things are taught the way they're taught and how they're going to affect us. So when I say, I want to live a spiritual life, and by doing so, I won't be overburdened, I won't feel obligated, but I'll feel joyful whenever I make a choice or whenever I engage in spiritual activity, that it'll bring happiness and contentment to my life. I can't just say that. I have to know why that's the case. I have to develop a belief in that through my analysis and through my observation, right? So analysis and observation are the two tools we have. There are some subjects that maybe are too subtle for us to actually understand them directly right now, but we can observe others who live that life, who embody those ideals. And so that observation is one type of analysis. And then actual analysis or interrogation is the other type. So these three are quite important. And so if we think of wanting to live a meaningful life, a spiritual life, wanting to make sure all of our activities are in line with the teachings of the Buddha and are in line with liberation, right? They're in line with being free from samsara. Then what are the core principles that should be infiltrating all of our activities? And so there are a few, right? At the heart, I would say, is bodhicitta. So bodhicitta, of course, is the wish to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. It's the wish not to be free from suffering for myself alone, not to be free from suffering because I want happiness, but because I want to be a benefit to others. So that mind that consistently works for the benefit of others by working on developing your own mind, recognizing that in order for me to be of maximum benefit, I have to improve my own mind. That bodhicitta, that mind, is most important to come with us in all of our activities. That itself is fueled by a combination of equanimity and compassion. But when we talk about bodhicitta, we also talk about ultimate bodhicitta, which is the realization of emptiness, the wisdom that understands the nature of reality. So not only do we have to have a mind that wishes to free all sentient beings from suffering, from all the causes of suffering, and is willing to do whatever work is necessary to benefit others in that way, to free them from suffering, we have to have the wisdom that recognizes, the actual nature of reality. Things don't exist the way they appear to us. The way they appear to us is due to our constantly confused minds as sentient beings. We look at beautiful objects and we believe that their beauty is inherent in that object. And therefore, having a mind of desire or attachment towards that object is natural because the beauty is inherent in that object. Or we look towards unpleasurable objects or sensations or discomfort and say that that discomfort, that ugliness is inherent in that object. And therefore, having a mind of aversion or anger or hatred towards that object is natural because that object is not pleasurable, right? Once you have a mind that realizes the nature of reality, we realize that that sensation, that experience of something being pleasurable or not pleasurable, of being beautiful or ugly, that there's no inherent quality that exists in that way. That is a projection of our mind. So instead of reacting to the object that's in front of us, we're reacting to what we project upon that object, to our own hallucinations that we have projected onto the things in front of us that we then react to. So we've created this feedback loop where we're not engaging with reality. We're engaging with our own hallucinations. And from those hallucinations come all of our afflicted minds, all of our desire and our attachment and our hatred and our anger, our jealousy. Those all come from the ignorance that doesn't understand how things exist in front of us. So wisdom is incredibly important because it supports compassion. It supports the wish to benefit all sentient beings. Wisdom is what allows us to recognize others as suffering even when they're causing harm to us. Wisdom is the ability to look at how others engage in the world and realize that they are suffering sentient beings who deserve love and compassion and freedom from suffering, regardless of how they exist in the world, who they harm. So wisdom is what lets us cut through our own emotional preconceptions. And it supports compassion and bodhicitta in that way. So both wisdom and compassion, or wisdom and bodhicitta, which we call the conventional bodhicitta, which is the wish to become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings, and the ultimate bodhicitta, which is a direct realization of the nature of reality. Those two bodhicittas are always looking forward, right? They're looking at the future. They're looking around at sentient beings and saying, what is necessary to improve the circumstances for myself and for others to meet those two aims of myself becoming a Buddha and then liberating all sentient beings from suffering. Now, in addition to trying to make those two ideas of wisdom and bodhicitta influence everything we do, another core value is the recognition of how karma works. So karma, the law of cause and effect. The reason this is important is because when we understand that all of our actions have a consequence, then now what that allows us is to realize that everything we're experiencing right now came from a cause that we created in the past, whether in this life or in past lives. The reason that's useful is because it allows us to see our experiences, whether they're pleasurable experiences or unpleasant experiences, and realize those don't come from nowhere. Those aren't causeless. There are causes that cause them to happen. It's not like we are being persecuted for no reason, right? There's not some all-powerful entity that is going out of their way to persecute us. There's any unpleasantness we experience, any suffering we're experiencing right now, even though it may be related to external causes and conditions. The ultimate cause is the negative karma we created in the past that is now ripening as our experience of suffering. What that does is it lets us put the idea of suffering in context. And it also lets us put the idea of happiness in context. Okay? So we don't become overwhelmed by our suffering or our happiness. We realize these are the natural result of causes and conditions we created in the past. And therefore, since we're not overwhelmed by them, then our suffering doesn't hold us down. Instead, we recognize it for what it is, and we're able to develop fortitude or patience with it, whether that be physical suffering or emotional suffering. Okay? So karma, understanding the law of cause and effect, it looks backwards, and by looking backwards, it puts our present experience in context. But it also looks forward because it says, I know that I don't want to be suffering the way I am now. And if the way I'm suffering now is due to negative actions I did in the past, then the only way to prevent those from coming again is to not engage in those negative actions, to not create the causes for suffering in the future. So it looks forward as well. It looks forward and backward by saying, I know that what I'm experiencing now is due to causes I created in the past, and what I will experience in the future is due to causes I'm creating now. So therefore, I should be creating causes that will ripen as pleasant experiences and not causes that will ripen as negative experiences. So karma in that way is really powerful to reflect on because you realize that nothing is happening to us without a cause or without a reason. And that encourages you to prevent creating causes of suffering and to engage in creating more and more causes of happiness. But we're going to talk more about karma in an upcoming series. our upcoming Saturday afternoon series or evening series for the next 5 weeks, starting next Saturday, is going to be all about karma. So I'm not going to talk too much more about it now, but if we're thinking about the core ideas that need to infiltrate all of our daily activities, the two bodhicittas, the wish to become Buddha to benefit other sentient beings, and the realization that reality doesn't exist the way it appears to us, the wisdom of emptiness, those, along with karma, are some core elements we need to bring into our practice, into our everyday life. But the one I want to talk about most today is I want to talk about morality or Buddhist ethics. And this seems like not necessarily the most joyful topic, right? The whole point is for our spiritual practice to be joyful. And so talking about morality seems like I'm giving you more obligations. I'm giving you more chains to weigh you down. It's not like that, I promise. It can feel that way sometimes. But the point is, when we look at Buddhist codes of ethics, we see where they come from, we understand the rationale behind them, then following those ethical codes becomes natural because we see what the codes are designed to prevent, and by following them, what is encouraged. And when we realize that by following these ethical codes, what we're doing is moving ourselves away from suffering and moving closer and closer to the permanent bliss of Buddhahood, right? Then it no longer feels difficult or like an obligation to follow these ethical codes. So there's a couple different ways of thinking of morality or the Buddhist ethical codes. The first one that I'm going to talk about is just talking about the 10 non-virtuous actions. And then I'm going to talk about actual vows after that we can take as Buddhists, the different types of vows that we take. So the 10 non-virtuous actions, these are the 3 actions of body, 4 actions of speech, and the 3 actions of mind that the Buddha identified as always non-virtuous. That whenever we engage in these actions, it's impossible to engage in them and to have a purely virtuous mind. Now, that non-virtue may be heavier or lighter depending on certain factors, or it may be mixed sometimes if we have a really good intention, but we're still engaging in this action. But it can never be perfectly, it can never be neutral or virtuous. It's always going to have some aspect of non-virtue. That's why they're called the 10 non-virtuous actions. So the first 3 are the non-virtues of body, of bodily actions, right? Because our actions come in 3 types. We have actions of body, speech, and mind. Now, of those, as Buddhists, we say the most important is the actions of mind, because all of our actions of body and our actions of speech are motivated by a mental action. Everything we do, even if it's not explicit, okay, even if we don't explicitly have this thought that I'm going to do this thing, we still have some mental activity that is causing us to engage in an action of speech or an action of body. So because of that, that's why we started the session by setting an intention. Setting an intention is creating is a mental activity that is trying to overwhelm our entire experience, right? To make everything we do virtuous. So mental activities tend to be the most important. That's what we focus on. This idea of the ends justifies the means is not something that we accept as Buddhists. The means are what are important, okay? That we do things with the right mindset is important. But the 10 non-virtues, the first 3, are of body, of physical actions. And these are very easy to remember because most of us don't do them anyway. So it's very easy to follow. The first one is not engaging in killing. The second is not engaging in stealing. And the third is not engaging in sexual misconduct. Okay? So killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct are always going to be non-virtuous. It's not possible for them to be purely virtuous. Okay? And they go in order of heaviness. So killing is the heaviest, stealing is the second, the medium, and sexual misconduct is the lightest. But they're still non-virtuous. Just of those 3, that's the lightest. So we'll talk more about them in a second. But then to get through all 10. Next are the non-virtues of speech. And these, I think, are the hardest for us, to be honest. Most of us it's very easy for us to not engage in the non-virtues of body. Killing might be difficult. We think killing isn't just killing human beings. How many of us kill insects? How many of us will kill, a bed bug if we see it, or a spider, Or how many of us, most of us probably aren't butchers, but if we eat meat, then we're at least participating in an economy of violence where beings are being slaughtered for our own benefit, which isn't the same as killing, according to some teachers. Other teachers say it is. But so killing is a little more difficult to avoid than we think, because many of us do kill insects, at the least, right? But for the most part, killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct are relatively easy to avoid. When we get to the 4 actions of speech, it's much harder, I think. So the 4 actions of speech, the first one is lying. The second is engaging in divisive speech, so speech that is causing either specifically a Sangha community to have a division, but also just creating disunity, right? A speech that is looking to cause problems, basically, and to create disloyalty or dissension. That's divisive speech. Then the third is harsh speech. So harsh speech isn't speech that's simply unpleasant to hear. It's not saying curse words or things like this. That's not what it means. It's speech that is spoken without a beneficial mind as its intentionality, right? So it's possible to curse, and that is not harsh speech. But to say really pleasant words and for that to be harsh speech, you know, we talk about these backhanded compliments, right? We've definitely heard of that, where someone compliments something about you, but they're really doing is insulting you, but putting it in nice language. That would be harsh speech, even though the words might be very pleasant, right? So this idea that harsh speech is only speech that upsets, that is coarse language, that's not correct. It's speech that is spoken with the intent to upset the mind of the person that hears it. That's what is meant by harsh speech. And then the last one is idle chatter or gossip. So kind of meaningless speech. So these 4 are the 4 non-virtuous activities of speech. And I think these are some of the hardest ones for us to avoid. So we'll get back to them. Let's just finish up the list of 10, and we'll get to the 3 non-virtuous actions of mind. The first one is covetousness, okay? Wanting things that don't belong to you. Having both jealousy and a desire for things that don't belong to you. Whether those are physical things, like possessions, or status, or other less tangible things. Being covetous of others, wanting things that aren't yours. That's the first. The second is the mind of malice, a mind that wishes to harm others, that thinks others are deserving of harm. Now, it's important to realize that malice is also included towards harmful people, right? So if someone is a harmful person, thinking that they deserved whatever they get if they get harmed, that's still malice. The idea of someone deserving it or it being righteous doesn't take away from the fact that it's still non-virtuous, wishing for someone to experience suffering in any way. And then the last of the 3 non-virtues of mind, non-virtuous actions, is having wrong views. This is specifically having views that the 3 objects of refuge are not genuine objects of refuge, or believing that the law of cause and effect and karma don't exist, things like this. This is what it means to have wrong views. So that is actually the heaviest of the negative actions of mind, is to believe that things such as karma isn't real, or the Buddha's teachings aren't valid. So those 10, right? The 10 actions to avoid: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and then idle speech or gossip, and then covetousness, malice, and wrong views. These 10 are always going to be non-virtuous. Just saying that is easy to say, right? What is more important to me is to say, what is it about them that is causing harm? And by not engaging in those activities, what is being replaced in my life that is causing the opposite of harm? And this is, in part at least, where vows come in. So before I go into more detail about it, let's bring in the idea of the pratimoksha vows. So there's 3 types of vows that we can have. The first one is called the pratimoksha vows, or the vows of individual liberation. Okay. And there's a number of different categories within that. So the vows of a layperson and the vows of a fully ordained monk are both considered pratimoksha vows. They're just different types of pratimoksha vows. So there are 8 divisions within the category of pratimoksha vows, but the most important for your purposes is the 5 vows of a layperson or of a householder. Okay, so the pratimoksha vows any of you will hold in your continuum are the 5 vows of a layholder, which are the vow not to kill, not to steal, not to engage in sexual misconduct, not to lie, and not to consume intoxicants. Okay, so as a layperson, those are the 5 pratimoksha vows. So you'll see the first 4 are directly antagonist to the first 4 of the non-virtuous activities, right? And then the 5th one, not to consume intoxicants, sometimes is spoken as the most important one, because there's nothing inherently negative or non-virtuous about intoxicants, right? But when you're engaging in any activity that decreases your ability to actually control your body and speech and mind, then you end up engaging in other harmful activities. So it only takes a few bottles of beer to all of a sudden think lying and stealing are good ideas, right? Or engaging in sexual misconduct is a good idea. So that's why it's so important to avoid intoxicants. So those are the 5 vows that are the pratimoksha vows, the vows of individual liberation that are held by a householder. And so if you look at those vows, and as they relate to the 10 non-virtues, we ask, what is being avoided by not killing, right? What, by not killing, we're not allowing the space of anger or the dissatisfaction. We're not allowing ourselves to be overwhelmed by whatever mind or intentionality would allow us to cause harm to others. And by doing that, what then have we created space for? We have created space for compassion, for realizing that others are suffering, that others don't want to suffer, the same as us. They just want to be free from suffering. They want to experience happiness. Whether that be an insect or whether that be a dictator of a country, okay? All they want to do is have happiness and not have suffering. And because of their own ignorance, they don't understand the distinction, and they're going about activities that are causing harm to themselves and others, thinking it's going to bring happiness. So the thing to avoid by not killing is we avoid the negative mind of anger, which clouds all of our judgment, doesn't allow us to see things clearly. We avoid the self-cherishing mind that says my life is more important or my happiness is more important, and we replace it with compassion and recognizing that others are deserving of love and happiness. Now, I should say, sorry, I should have said this earlier, all of our vows need to be predicated on a sense of refuge, right? In order to, they don't have to. We can take these vows without having refuge, obviously, but the vows themselves become more powerful when they're predicated on refuge. So, being the recognition that the Buddha, the Dharma, and the suffering of samsara, that those 3 jewels are what are going to save us from samsara. And so that refuge, that confidence that the teachings of the Buddha and the Buddha himself, as well as the community of practitioners, are what will bring about our own liberation. That refuge serves as the basis for the vows to then take root in our continuum. Okay. So the vows, if they're not based on refuge, they aren't as stable. So when I think about the fact that, especially the non-virtuous of speech, why is it that those are hard to follow? Now, there's only vows against the non-virtuous speech of lying in the 5 lay vows, at least. Okay. But there's no explicit vow for a lay person to not engage in divisive speech or harsh speech or idle gossip. So there's no explicit vow. But those are still recognized as non-virtuous activities. So what is it about engaging in those that is not going to bring us satisfaction? That's only going to bring us unhappiness, even if they seem like they're going to bring us temporary satisfaction. That's what we need to understand. Because if we say that those are harmful, but we don't understand why they're harmful or why replacing them with something else will be beneficial, then why would we ever do it, right? If we think that engaging in gossip or idle chatter is not really harmful at all, then why would we ever stop doing it? That's what's important. So just accepting the teachings, like I said, study is important, but then you have to do the work of contemplation, that middle step of study, contemplation, and meditation. Why are these activities of speech harmful? Especially the hardest one for some of us to wrap our minds around is idle speech. It's easy to understand why lying is harmful, right? Even white lies are a little harder. It's hard to understand why white lies are harmful. We think we have good intention, but we're still being non-truthful. So it is still important not to engage in them. But lying, we mostly can understand why it's harmful, even if we have some doubts. Divisive speech, also easy, right? To create a division, to create dissent. It's easy to see why that is harmful. And even harsh speech, speech that is meant to cause someone's mind to be unsettled, right? Or unpleasant, or receive it in an unpleasant way. That's also easy to understand. We might quibble about what exactly qualifies as harsh speech or not. We might quibble as what qualifies as divisive speech or not. But overall, they're easy. But idle chatter or gossip, why is that harmful, right? So there are a couple of reasons. I see a comment right now in the chat. There will be time for questions at the end. But if there's an important question, you can also ask it and interrupt me as we're going. That's fine. The fact that I saw that chat is unusual. So it's okay just to interrupt me, just to unmute your mic and interrupt me. And if it's something that I think is important to answer right now, I will. Otherwise, I'll leave it to the end, and there will be time for questions at the end. Sorry. So I can give you a few reasons why gossip is not is going to be harmful. It's more important that you think about it on your own. Like, that's what's most important about a lot of these topics, is that you come to some understanding on your own. But so for the simple point, you can see that when you're engaging in idle gossip, when you're engaging in this chatter, what you're doing is you're encouraging your self-cherishing mind. You're encouraging the mind that is seeking out temporary happiness, temporary satisfaction, right? And by doing that, you're again confusing satisfaction as if it were actual happiness. That's the source of so much of our suffering, that we consider temporary happiness as if it were permanent, real happiness. We don't recognize that it's worldly, that it's impermanent, that it is something that is made up and is going to disappear again. So engaging in this idle chatter is encouraging that. The other thing we could say is that engaging in idle chatter is wasting this perfect human rebirth, where we could be engaging in something meaningful. We could be engaging in a spiritual practice, and instead we're wasting it in gossip. Now, I will say, as someone who has worked in the mental health sphere, sometimes when someone's going through a crisis, whether it be an actual mental health crisis or just having a hard time, you just want to talk to them about something that it doesn't seem important, right? You just want to talk about something to get their mind off whatever is eating them up. That isn't necessarily gossip. What you're doing is trying to engage in a way to help someone, even if the content of what you're talking about may seem not important, but the way you're going about talking about it is with the intention to help someone, to bring them benefit. Okay. So that's why I said it can be a little bit fuzzy around the borders. So we have to make sure we know what our intentions are and make sure we see what is happening when we're engaging in this kind of talk. But on our own, we have to come to understand, how do these things harm us? How does engaging in gossip or lying or stealing, engaging in sexual misconduct, how does cultivating wrong views, having a mind of malice or covetousness, how do those things harm us? If we don't have conviction that they harm us, then we're not going to have any reason to try to stop them. And what's going to happen is we'll just keep creating more negative karma, and that negative karma will multiply, and we'll experience more and more suffering. We create a feedback loop. They all all of the vows. So the three types of vows, the Pratimoksha vows, the Bodhisattva vows, and the Tantric vows, all are about getting rid of the self-cherishing mind and moving towards virtue. They just have different ways of doing it. So when we think of, I want to live my life following a spiritual path and applying that spiritual path to everything I do, but I don't want it to feel like work. I want it to be joyful. We have to realize how these vows, how this morality is encouraging us. So I wanted to talk for the rest of the time about the Bodhisattva vows. Now, many of us that are here together may not have actually taken the Bodhisattva vows. That's okay. We can still study them and talk about them and see how they're beneficial. So the Bodhisattva vows are what really, as ordinary sentient beings, push us forward onto the path of Buddhahood and to becoming a Bodhisattva. So a Bodhisattva is someone that actually has realized actual bodhicitta and is actively working to benefit all sentient beings in everything they do. So if having a mind of refuge is what identifies us as a Buddhist, and then having the Pratimoksha vows identifies us as having begun the journey of freeing ourselves from samsara, then the Bodhisattva vows, having those in our continuum, is what identifies us as someone who is walking the path of a Bodhisattva, right? So I thought we'd talk about those today, and then talk about how, even if we haven't taken those vows formally, how those vows, what is the point of those vows? What are those vows trying to encourage in our behavior and in our minds? And how can that make all of our experiences joyful? Okay. So with the Bodhisattva vows, there are 18 Bodhisattva vows, root vows, There are 46 secondary vows or branch vows. We're not going to talk about the branch vows. Those aren't important for right now. But what you should know is that the branch vows are, for the most part, all focused around our practice of the six perfections. So the activities that bodhisattvas are engaging in perfected activity of. So the activity of generosity, of morality, of patience, of perseverance, of concentration or meditation, and of wisdom, right? Those six perfected activities of bodhisattvas and Buddhas that we are trying to cultivate in our life, most of the branch vows are directly related to one of those six. So as long as we're actively trying to engage in the six perfections, in those six activities, then we're going to be following the branch vows to a large extent. But so we'll put those 46 on the back burner. I want to focus on the 18 today. But before that, I think it's useful that we're given advice about what do we do to prevent those vows that we have taken from degenerating in this life, right? And so the first thing we want to do is we want to contemplate the advantages of having bodhisattva vows, as well as the disadvantages to not having them. Okay, and what that means is recognizing when you develop a mind of bodhicitta, how is that going to improve your life? Now, there's a list of advantages. If you read the Lamrim material, both the Lamrim Chemo, the great sages on the treatise, the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, or any of the commentaries on it, they'll list what are those advantages. Well, we can think of some for ourselves. If all of our lives are dedicated to benefiting others, to working towards improve our own minds so that we might be of greater service to others, how is that going to be beneficial for our own experience, right? So we can come up with advantages on our own of taking away our self-cherishing mind and replacing it with the mind that cherishes others. So in order to guard your vows from degenerating, the first thing we think about is the advantages. Now, another way to guard your vows from degenerating is to recite the vows 3 times a day in the morning and 3 times a day in the evening. There are a couple different verses that contain the heart of the vows. The most common one is a 12-line verse that we can go over later if we have time. That is in a lot of prayers that we recite. The prayer we started with, which is Refuge in Bodhicitta, that 4 lines, that's a very condensed version. So there's a more elaborate one that's 12 lines. That is what is most common. But there are other versions as well. So reciting our commitment to the vows every day, 3 times in the morning and 3 times in the evening, helps prevent those vows from degenerating. It's just reminding ourselves daily, right? That's why having a daily practice is important. Because even if we study this material, even if we understand it intellectually, we need to make it one with our mind, right? Through meditation. And that comes through repetition. That comes through doing it over and over and over again until it no longer is something we think about, but it becomes effortless, right? So reciting these vows or reciting a prayer for the bodhisattva vows every day is a type of repetition. And you have to remember that when we recite prayers, they aren't just words, they aren't just hopes, they are a type of meditation. When you're reciting a prayer, there's usually some sort of visualization you can be doing that goes along with it, right? So that prayer itself, whatever it may be, is a type of meditation. It's a type of calming your mind, of training your mind. It isn't just words. It isn't just a wish, It's more than that. So that's the second way to guard the vows. The third is that we shouldn't give up the bodhisattva vows due to what is called the mischievous behavior of sentient beings. So what that means is when other beings engage in harmful activity, then we shouldn't pick and choose and say, well, they aren't worthy of my love and compassion. And the bodhisattva vows aren't important when relating to those beings because they're not behaving in ways that I approve of, right? So we shouldn't give up our vows because of mischievous sentient beings. Instead, we should keep them pure for all sentient beings without picking and choosing. And the last one is we need to work to accumulate what are called the 2 collections. So the collection of merit and the collection of wisdom. And so that means engaging in virtuous activity and developing a mind that understands the nature of reality. So those 2 things work together to help support our bodhisattva vows. And then doing our best to study the vows, to live with the vows, helps us develop merit and develop wisdom. So it creates a positive feedback loop, right? So to work on amassing the 2 accumulations of merit and wisdom, and then study the vows, understand what the point of the vows is, how they affect our lives, and by holding true to the vows, how does that make our lives better? How does that bring us closer to Buddhahood? Those things work together, okay? So, yeah, let's start with going through the vows, and then we'll see what we have time for when that is done. There's some other things to talk about, but we can see. So, as I said, there are 18 root vows. Now, some of these vows are going to seem like common sense, right? And that's the beauty of a lot of the Buddhist morality, is that it is common sense. And some of them are maybe a little less commonsensical. For the 18 Bodhisattva vows, most of them make a lot of sense, so they're easy. There's one that's a little bit strange, but it's okay. It's actually not strange. It's just strange that we have to promise not to do it because we probably wouldn't be doing it anyway. But we'll get there. That comes up a little later. So the first one is, so I should say all of the Bodhisattva vows are what we say are proscriptive vows. So they're vows not to do something, to abandon doing something. In the same way that the 5 pratimoksha vows are also proscriptive. Do not kill, do not steal, do not engage in sexual misconduct, do not lie, and do not consume intoxicants. So those are all proscriptive. It's the same for all of the Bodhisattva vows. They're proscriptive, telling us negative activities that we should abandon. There are prescriptive vows telling us what we should be doing, but those are when we get to Tantra. So there are some tantric vows that says you should be engaging in generating a mind of compassion this many times a day, or you should be doing these things. You make a promise to do those things. Those are prescriptive vows, but those aren't included in the Bodhisattva vows. So all of these are things that we need to abandon, okay? So the first one that we need to abandon is praising ourselves and belittling others, especially out of attachment or jealousy, wishing to receive admiration, right? So the first vow a bodhisattva takes is I'm not going to praise myself and I'm not going to belittle others, with the motivation that I want admiration, or I want to receive offerings, or I want others to think favorably of me. So self-praise or belittling others, especially out of attachment or jealousy. That's the first vow, avoiding that, abandoning that. I think we'll go through all the vows first, and then we'll talk about what it means to not have them, right? So instead of spending a long time in each of them, I want to get all 18 of them done because, like I said, we're going to probably end at noon today. So I want to go through all 18, and then we'll go back to talk with a little more detail. But this one, I will say, to spend a little bit of time on this one, because it is the first one. And it seems natural sometimes that we should want to praise ourselves, especially when we do good work, right? We want to rejoice in our good deeds. So what's important here is praising ourselves out of attachment or jealousy, praising ourselves with a mind that is seeking out others to admire us, to develop a mind of fame. If we are pointing out our own accomplishments as a way to inspire others, and we have a genuine mind that says, I want to inspire others to engage in this kind of behavior, then that is not breaking this vow. Okay. This vow is when you're motivated by attachment or jealousy, that you want to be famous, you want people to admire you, you want people to think you're such a great teacher, I'm always going to attend your teachings. That is when this is what is being avoided, right? So by abandoning praising yourself or belittling others, which are really two sides of the same coin, right? Saying I'm really good at something, oh, but he's not so good at it. Those are really doing the same thing, right? By abandoning them, what you're doing is you're fighting against your self-cherishing mind, the mind that is grasping on to the 8 worldly concerns, the mind that is tying you to suffering. That's going to be true for almost all of these. That by abandoning this, what you're doing is you're fighting against the self-cherishing mind, right? But we can see how it's easy to want to praise ourselves. And it's acceptable to, and even encouraged to rejoice in our virtues, right? Rejoicing is one of the most powerful activities we can do. But to rejoice in the virtuous things you've done, and even to rejoice in your worldly accomplishments, is different than to, out of a mind of jealousy or attachment, parade your own accomplishments or your own good qualities in front of others. And this isn't even saying lying about them. This is actual good qualities you might have or other accomplishments you might have achieved. It's not even saying not lying about them. It's saying that if you've done this thing, you shouldn't be praising it and belittling others in the process. So that's the first one. The next one is even though you are able, not giving material aids to others, especially out of a motivation of miserliness. That includes not teaching Dharma to others or sharing spiritual advice to others when they ask for it, if you are able as well. Okay. So not giving aid to others when you are able to out of miserliness, or the miserliness there in the act of, like, for instance, sharing spiritual understanding is that if you want to keep these teachings for yourself and you don't think that others deserve them, they're not deserving of them, they're not worthy of them, that would be like a spiritual miserliness. Whereas not giving physical things to others, whether it be money or food or these things, is a miserliness related to external goods, right? So this isn't saying give away all of your things. It's saying when you are able to do that, but you don't because you're miserly, that is breaking the vow. It's not expecting everyone to be paupers to give away everything. It's saying that when you have the means to be giving to others, but you're not doing it due to your own miserliness, your own wish to hoard, to collect more for yourself, that is when you break the vow. If you look at a lot of the great teachers throughout history, and you look at a lot of the great Indian teachers, especially, they didn't have anything to give away, right? They had a set of robes, maybe. That's it, you know? And even then, they would still give away anything that was given to them. There's a great story of Karatana. What's his name? Famous Shankar. Oh, Shankar, who is Shakar rather. He is famous for being a vegetarian, Tibetan monk who's vegetarian, and wrote all these treatises on why it's important to be vegetarian. Shapkar, and he did a lot of retreat up in the caves. And every one of the Tibetan lineages, the Geluk, the Nyingma, the Sakya, the Kagyu, all worship him, not worship him, but hold him up as a teacher. They all say he's part of our lineage. So everyone really has a lot of respect for Shapkar. He'd be up in his cave meditating, and all of these students would come and give him offerings. So even though he himself possessed nothing but, a begging bowl and a set of robes, he'd collect all these things because people would keep bringing him all these offerings. And then every once in a while, he would just leave his cave and go down to the nearest monastery and give away everything he had received. So even though he himself had nothing, whenever people brought him things, he would just give them away, right? So the experience of possessing material goods is not something that a lot of the teachers in our lineage is not something that they encouraged, right? Because all they do is breed attachment. The only benefit of having material goods is it gives you the opportunity to give them to others. That's the biggest benefit of having any material good, is that you can give it away. So the second vow is not giving away things when you're able to, out of miserliness or a wish to hoard something for yourself. The third vow is to not forgive others, but instead hold a grudge, even after they apologize. All right? And generally, we say this has to be motivated by resentment or anger. So if someone apologizes, but you don't realize it, right, that's a little bit different. If they apologize, but you're still holding on to anger or resentment towards them, and you aren't able to forgive them, that's breaking this bodhisattva vow. This is, I think, a powerful one. I think forgiveness is really powerful. It's talked about a lot, especially because there's so much violence in the world right now that victims are expected to express forgiveness. And sometimes if victims don't express forgiveness in the way that the people in power want them to, then they're looked upon as bad victims, right? So forgiveness is weaponized sometimes by people in power. The important thing about forgiveness is that forgiveness doesn't really affect the people who engage in violence. Forgiveness is for the victims, right? So if someone causes harm to you, to forgive them doesn't benefit them in any way. It benefits you. It benefits your mind. It makes your mind not become a place for anger and for resentment and for frustration and for sadness and for despair, right? Forgiveness is for the person the person who experiences violence, or whatever kind of violence it may be, or experiences, unfairness. So not forgiving others, but instead harboring a grudge against them, whether it be a petty grudge or something really big and valid, quote unquote valid, that's still going to be breaking this bodhisattva vow. The next one, abandoning the Mahayana teachings by saying that some parts of them are maybe not real teachings of the Buddha, and instead making up your own teachings. So the Mahayana teachings are quite expansive, right? And they contain a lot of topics, and we may not understand all of those topics. So it's fine as especially new practitioners to say this topic, it doesn't either make sense for my mind, or studying this is hard for me right now. It's hard for me to believe it. So as a new practitioner in the West, it was hard for me to believe in the 6 realms of rebirth. It was very hard, and that's very common in Westerners. But rebirth in general is a hard thing for Westerners to understand, right? So at that time, what I did was I have confidence that these teachings are valid and in the teachers who are teaching them to me, but this doesn't make sense for my mind. So instead of saying it's not valid, I'm just going to put it to the side for right now. I'm going to focus on the teachings that are actively benefiting my mind right now, and I'll come back to this later. That is a perfectly valid approach. But to say this teaching isn't valid because I don't agree with it, or to say this teaching is not a real teaching of the Buddha, but something that was made up by someone else, that is what is meant by breaking this vow. So by abandoning the Mahayana teachings, it means to say that these aren't legitimate teachings, regardless of your personal understanding of them or not. The fifth Bodhisattva vow is to take back offerings you've made to the Buddha, Dharma, or Sangha, or by robbing or stealing from the three jewels, and then using them for your own, using things that have been given to the Sangha for your own purposes. So this applies especially to monks and nuns who, if you live in a community and there were things that were given to the community to benefit the whole community, but you use them for your own personal gain, that counts as stealing from the Sangha. In the same way, if you buy offerings to make to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, whether it just be offerings you bought to put on your altar or to bring to a puja, but then instead of doing that, you just keep them for yourself and you say, oh, they have enough. I don't need to give more, you know? Or you want to make offerings to the temple, but then you say, oh, instead of making offerings to the temple, they have enough. I'm just going to keep this for myself. If you'd already had a mindset that purchased this thing or had decided to make an offering, and then you change your mind, that's the same as taking away something from the three jewels. So that's what this is talking about. Especially taking it away for your own benefit. Now, the next, number 6, is abandoning or criticizing any of the teachings. So what that's to say, if you are practicing the Bodhisattva teachings, criticizing the Hinayana teachings, or if you are practicing the Tantra teachings, criticizing the Bodhisattva teachings, right? Or if we are studying in the Gaelic lineage, but we criticize then the Sakya lineage, or we criticize the Chinese practitioners of Chinese Dharma, of Chan, or we criticize Zen Buddhism, criticizing any of the teachings of the Buddha, even if they aren't the ones you practice, that is incredibly heavy, right? So we say all the teachings of the Buddha are the actual legitimate teachings of the Buddha, and they are benefiting different types of students. So there are some students for whom those teachings are what are necessary for them to move closer to Buddhahood, okay? So to criticize any of them is to criticize all of them. So criticizing any of the different types of teachings of the Buddha, even if they're ones that you don't follow yourself. You know, if you are someone that follows the Mahayana teachings, then you don't follow the Hinayana teachings directly, but to criticize them is still criticizing the teachings of the Buddha. So that's the 6th one. 7th is harming an ordained person or inflicting any violence upon them or imprisoning them or stealing from them or causing them to lose their vows. So this one, it makes sense. This is just building off of other things we've already promised not to do, which is to not harm others, to not steal from others, to not kill others, right? To not unjustly imprison others. So specifically focusing that on ordained people, because people, nuns and monks who hold vows, if they hold vows purely, they're objects of virtue, right? They're objects upon which we can accumulate more virtue. So this vow is specifically saying don't do those things against one of those people. Now, 8, this is kind of an easy one. Don't commit any of the 5 heinous actions. So what are the 5 heinous actions? Killing your mother, killing your father, killing an arhat, drawing blood from a Buddha with malintent or with bad intention, as opposed to accidentally, and then causing a schism in the Sangha community. Those 5 actions are called the 5 heinous actions. They're called that because they're so the karma associated with them is so heavy that if you commit them and you don't repair it and you don't do anything to resolve or remediate it, then after passing away from this life, you'll immediately be reborn in one of the lower realms. You won't even go through the bardo. You're immediately reborn, they say. It's uninterrupted. Or if you are born in the bardo, it's for a very quick time. But there won't be any other lives between that karma being generated and that karma ripening, rather. That's what's most important to understand. So not committing any of those, which none of us should be committing anyway. So that's an easy one, right? The next one, number 9, don't hold wrong views. So don't cultivate any wrong views, such as sectarianism or holding the three jewels are not valid sources of refuge, or that the law of cause and effect is not accurate. So this is again one of the 10 non-virtues, right? The last of the 10, to not cultivate wrong views. So that is also specifically one of the Bodhisattva vows. Not cultivating not wrong views. You notice it isn't part of the Pride and Moksha vows, right? But it is part of the Bodhisattva vows because it's just being made explicit. It's always non-virtuous, but it's being made explicit in the Bodhisattva vows. Now, number 10, this is possibly my favorite because it is the easiest to follow. And this is don't destroy any town or country, such as by fire or black magic and so forth. This is really easy for me, I'd say. I don't go around destroying towns, so it's pretty easy. However, this does also include things like houses, places people stay, right? So if we look at it in a more expansive way, it is not destroying a shelter that someone is using as refuge, worldly refuge, right? And this actually does have an effect in our lives. We can look at people who live in homeless camps, who live in tents and homeless camps, maybe on public property. If we're supporting politicians who are destroying those homeless encampments, that's the same as destroying homes and towns. So that would be breaking this vow. So there are ways for us to break this vow, even though we may not have the power of a king or a politician to actually destroy a town, right? They also say, at least some of the contemporary teachers say, don't destroy any towns or homes by pollution either. So then you get into this whole debate about you contributing to the global pollution, how much of that is destroying the ecology and destroying towns? And that isn't so clear. That's a contemporary interpretation of this vow, but it is something to think about, that we cause harm to the places that people look to as refuge, whether they're human beings or other living beings. They look at these places as their homes, right? And we engage in activities that cause harm to those. So this vow is about not doing that on all different scales. So for the large scale, that's pretty easy for us. But it is actually something we should think about because we do engage in activities that can cause harm to those things that people look to for their own source of refuge and safety, worldly refuge and safety. The next one, number 11, don't teach emptiness to those who are not ready for it, right? So emptiness, the idea that nothing exists the way we perceive it, nothing truly exists. It exists in conventional terms, but it doesn't exist inherently. That's what we mean by emptiness. That's the ultimate view of Buddhism. It's the ultimate philosophical understanding of the nature of reality. The reason we have to be careful teaching it is if you don't teach it correctly, it's very easy to encourage people into nihilism, to think nothing matters at all. If something doesn't exist inherently, then it must not exist at all. Therefore, nothing I do matters. That is a very easy thing to slip into if you explain it in the wrong way or if someone doesn't understand what you're saying. So we have a vow as bodhisattvas or as people practicing the bodhisattva path not to teach emptiness to those who are not prepared for it or who may not understand it, because it may either cause them to become nihilists or it may cause such fear in them that they don't want to practice Dharma at all, right? Now that's hard because I don't know what you know or what you don't know. I don't know what you're ready for. So as someone teaching, you have to be attentive to the students, right? And one of the more important parts of this vow for me, as someone who is trained to engage in teaching and in sharing my spiritual journey and practice, is being attentive to the needs of the students and teaching in such a way, following the example of the Buddha and all of my teachers, teaching in such a way that is meeting the students where they are and benefiting the students as best I can. Even though I don't know their minds, but I can at least be attentive to their responses and to where they are in their spiritual journey. So this is specifically saying don't teach emptiness to those who it would cause great disruption, but really when you're engaging in teaching, and not just formal teaching like I'm doing, but when you're engaging even in spiritual conversations or you're trying to offer advice, whether it be spiritual or worldly advice, we have to do it in such a way that meets the people that we're helping where they are. If we go something that's over their head, that's too much for them, it's just going to cause them to go the other way, right? So that's what this is really getting at, is that when you're trying to be of service to others, to share your knowledge or your wisdom or your experience, you can't just be like a flood, right? You have to be wise about the way you share that knowledge, depending on your audience and who you're trying to help. Number 12, you should never turn away someone who's working towards enlightenment by encouraging them to work towards liberation alone. So those of us who are practicing the paramita path, our goal is to become Buddhas, right? The goal to become a Buddha is a much more expansive goal than to just be free from samsara for ourself alone, to become an arhat, right? Both of those are quite difficult to do compared to our everyday life. But to become an arhat is easier, and it takes less time, whereas to become a Buddha takes more time. So if someone is engaging in the practices of a bodhisattva, and you say, you know what, why don't you just focus on yourself? Focus on helping yourself only. It doesn't matter if you work so hard for others. That's going to take too long. Focus on yourself alone. Encouraging people to do that, that is what it means by this vow. So in a worldly sense, we can say that we can look at people who are maybe caregivers and they look like they're burning out. And so then what kind of advice do you give them? We say self-compassion is important, which really in Buddhism means renunciation, or it means giving up your attachment to this life and to samsara. That's what we mean by self-compassion. But that's not the same thing as saying you should give up your work for others, right? So if someone looks like they're burning out, then and you want to give them advice, you wouldn't say don't help others. You'd say find a way to do this in a way that's healthy, that you can manage, that doesn't cause you to be burnt out or stressed out. Try to find balance in your life. So you can give that advice. But to say, oh, don't bother helping others. Look, it's hurting you. Focus on your own self. Go for a spa day. Take care of yourself only. Don't worry about others. That is what we're trying to avoid, right? So on the worldly scale and on the spiritual scale, we should always be encouraging others to be of service to others, right? To become Buddhas themselves. And if we notice that they are creating obstacles for themselves because they're not doing it in a wise way, then we can try to help them be more wise. But that isn't to discourage them entirely. So that is number 12. Number 13 is encouraging someone to abandon their pratimoksha vows. So for lay people, this is a little easier to follow because it's hard to encourage people to steal, kill, lie, engage in sexual misconduct, or consume intoxicants. When you're a monk or a nun, you have many more pratimoksha vows. As a fully ordained monk, I have 253. So it's easy for someone to encourage me not to follow all of those. So what this is saying is the pratimoksha vows are designed for you to achieve liberation from samsara, whereas the bodhisattva vows are designed for you to become a Buddha, right? So if someone is engaging in a strong practice, for you to say those vows aren't so important, don't worry about that, right? That is what you're trying to avoid. Anyone that is engaged in a spiritual practice, to say their spiritual practice is not worthwhile and to discourage them from that, that's what we're trying to avoid. The 14th, this kind of is almost a repetition of one we had earlier, but this is belittling the Shravaka vehicle. So belittling the Hinayana, basically, and saying that anyone that practices the Hinayana isn't practicing the real Buddhism, or the teachings of the Hinayana vehicle or the Shravaka vehicle, we say, aren't legitimate teachings of the Buddha. By belittling those, we are harming all of the Dharma. So that's 14. Now, that's not to say, especially when we're studying, that we recognize the distinctions between the philosophical ideals of our school and of other schools, and to say that we might believe that our interpretation of certain things is more accurate than theirs, right? That's not to say that. You're allowed to criticize in that way, right? Because you're trying to develop your own practice. But to say that this is the more refined understanding of the Buddha isn't to say that that isn't a valid teaching. That is a valid teaching for certain disciples because it helps affect their mind in the most meaningful way. So this isn't to say that you just accept everything and say everything is right at the same time, because some of the teachings from the Hinayana school and the Mahayana school are contradictory. They aren't all the same, right? But those teachings are designed to meet the needs of certain students. So belittling the Shravaka vehicle is the 14th. 15th is proclaiming realizations of emptiness that you haven't had. So lying about your spiritual realizations or your spiritual practice. And this is having an air of pretense that is really designed to make others think better of you. So lying about your accomplishments in general for the purpose of fame or popularity or any of these things. So if you remember, the first one is praising yourself out of attachment or jealousy. Praising yourself with legitimate things you accomplished. Now this is saying also don't proclaim false things that you've accomplished. So it's building off of that one. 16 is don't accept gifts that you know have been stolen from the 3 jewels or from a fully ordained monk or nun. So that's easy. You shouldn't accept gifts that are stolen from anyone, really, because accepting something you know is stolen is itself a type of stealing. And 17 is not establishing unfair practices. So this, again, is easier in a monastic community or more directly important for a monastic community, but it can affect their everyday life too. So to establish an unfair practice means, um, for instance, if let me see, in the monastic community, we say if there's someone who really spends all their time meditating and someone else who spends all their time reciting texts, and you make a rule that says, oh, the only people that receive offerings are those who recite texts, and you do that because you have some sort of animus to the person who likes to meditate, so you're creating an unfair rule, right, out of your own animus or your own negative mind. And by doing so, you might cause that person to abandon their practice, which is itself virtuous. So creating an unfair practice or being biased in the way you engage in the world. So in the monastic community, that's easy to understand. But we can see when we treat others, right? When we're at work or with our family, if there's one person, if two people are doing relatively similar things, but one person we like more than the other, when we create a rule to favor the person we like that harms the person we don't like, then that is what this means. That whenever we're creating rules or guidelines, they have to be fair and equal. We should be treating everyone equally. We shouldn't be showing favor or bias to the people we like, and especially not when we're creating rules or guidelines that everyone is expected to follow. And then the last of the 18 is not abandoning bodhicitta, the actual wish to help other sentient beings. And this has to do with realizing that it's very easy to become overwhelmed, especially there's so much suffering in the world right now, to feel like I can't really do anything, that I am never going to be able to help others in any meaningful way. And therefore, what's the point? It's easy to have that thought because it is overwhelming right now at sometimes. Looking at how everything seems to be getting worse and worse in many political situations and social situations, right? So this is really fighting against that despair and saying that my mind that wishes to become Buddha to benefit all sentient beings, it recognizes that I'm not going to liberate everyone tomorrow, but that I have a long-term goal, that I am working towards benefiting all sentient beings, and it is something that I've committed my life to, and I don't expect there to be immediate results. So even if things are overwhelming now, there's always something I can do to benefit others in some small way. Okay? And it doesn't have to draw attention to myself. It doesn't have to be flashy. It doesn't have to even be recognized. But I can always do something that is keeping others as more important than myself. I can always lead with compassion. I can always have my actions motivated by compassion as opposed to animus, or as opposed to jealousy, or as opposed to a mind that prioritizes my own needs, right? And in that way, I am working towards benefiting others, even if the results aren't immediately noticeable. So abandoning bodhicitta by thinking I can't help other sentient beings, that is the last thing to be abandoned. So those are the 18 bodhisattva vows. Now, if we were going to go into more detail on these, I'd say that in order for a vow to be broken, it has to meet certain conditions. So not not abandoning something that could cause the vow to degenerate, which isn't the same as causing the vow to be broken. For our purposes, that's not especially important right now. Just know that if you do break the vows, you can renew them by taking them over again, and you take them. You don't have to take them from a teacher. You can take them from an image of the Buddha in front of you, right? So when you recite these vows every day in the morning and the evening, you can actively take the vows again at that time, right? So the difference between reciting the verses and renewing the vows versus taking the vows anew, the only difference is the visualization and the recognition that I'm receiving these vows. So we should be constantly renewing and protecting them. But that's more detail than we need for now. The reason I want to talk about those is because, to go back to this very first idea that I started with, why do we spend so much of our lives courting suffering, right? That we look at the virtuous opportunity and we say that's too much work. That's something that I don't want to do. And we look at the non-virtuous option and say that is what I'd rather do. Why do we always leave the key under the mat for the wolves? Why do we always turn toward our own destruction, our own suffering? Why do we do that? And how do these vows prevent us from doing that? If we try to live the life that these vows encourage us to live, how would that be a life that is only joyful and not a life of obligation, not a life of drudgery, right? When I think of the vows, this is especially true for monks and nuns, because for monks and nuns, we have so many vows, right? And I've seen people that are newly ordained that take up these vows. As a novice, you have 36 vows. So I've seen people just as novices, never mind flirting monks and nuns, and they look at these 36 vows and they look at them as holding them back from doing the kinds of things they want to do. When that's the mindset you have, you're not going to keep those vows for very long. When you look at these vows as a shackle, right, or as a chain holding you back, then you're fighting the vows. Instead, what's important is to look at all these vows as well as all of the teachings on morality and ethics in general. You shouldn't look at them as things holding you back from having a good time, from doing the things you want to do. Instead, the way I like to think of them is, we often have this image of this precious human rebirth being a boat that is traveling across the ocean of samsara to bring us to the far shore of Buddhahood, right? And the vows or morality are the oars that are guiding us and that are propelling us forward. They aren't holding us back. They're doing the opposite of that. And when you can realize that, then all of these vows become joyful, or all this advice, even if you don't have the actual vows in your continuum, but you want to model your life on the life of a bodhisattva, then by following these vows as if they were pieces of advice, trying to incorporate them into your life, what you're doing is you're propelling yourself towards Buddhahood. Okay? And the reason it is hard, the reason it's difficult, the reason it isn't our first instinct is because we've been following our self-cherishing mind for so long that is our first instinct. Our first instinct is to look at the worldly delights of samsara and grab onto those with both hands and say, this is happiness, this is where I find comfort. So we're constantly running towards samsara instead of towards liberation. And these vows are all pushing against that, whether they're the pratimoksha vows, whether the bodhisattva vows, or whether it's just not even the vows, but trying to follow the abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions. All of those are fighting against our self-cherishing mind, which is a mind that we have become habituated to in this life and in previous lives, again and again and again. So to try to incorporate them into our life, at first it takes work, and it does feel like it takes effort. But I can promise that the more you do it with an open mind, again, embodying those three characteristics of avoiding the three faults of a faulty vessel. So being open-minded, being attentive and aware, and being non-prejudiced. When you engage in these activities and always try to motivate yourself towards virtue, then the result is a lighter mind, because you've taken these opportunities to engage in the afflictions and you've replaced them with an opportunity to engage in cherishing others, with virtue, with morality, with benefit to yourself and to others. Okay? And so I know I went over these vows very quickly, but the point of them is to, and this, again, the point of our studying them, rather, again, going back to this idea that it's necessary to first study and then contemplate and then meditate, the point of studying them is to become convinced that these vows are leading you towards liberation. They're leading you towards Buddhahood. And that even the vows that may seem silly, like not destroying a town, or even the vows that may seem really hard, like not engaging in gossip, right? Even those aren't for no reason. They exist because it is our teachers and the Buddha himself recognizing the nature of reality and recognizing that engaging in those behaviors only causes suffering. And so if that's the truth, then we can analyze it and see if that's true in our life. We can see when there are opportunities where we've engaged in any of these things that the vows are telling us to abandon, and has it ever brought us long-lasting happiness? Has it ever brought us anything more than some temporary satisfaction that just goes away and makes it harder to reach again and again, right? And if we analyze, we'll see that it hasn't. All the best any of these things have done, if we don't abandon them, is bring us temporary, very worldly experience of happiness. And that happiness is not genuine happiness, right? It's just a different type of suffering. It's grasping at external phenomena as if it were actual happiness. And then when that external phenomena disappears, what are we left with? We're grasping nothing, and our happiness goes away just as quickly. So it's not real happiness. So when we look at these vows, the term we have in Tibetan is gaksha, the thing that is being negated. When we have these vows, what is it that these vows are meant to protect us from? Right? The vows are all meant to protect us from our own afflictions, but what is it specifically that every vow is meant to protect us from? And if we then follow that vow, or we abandon that negative action, what have we created space for? You know, what are we able to fill our lives with instead of that negative action? Both at a spiritual level, but then just on a practical level. If we don't spend our time doing X, then what can we do for what is why that comes in and fills our time instead. So these are the things we need to analyze, we need to think about. And I'm not going to go through all of them now. I think that's the purpose, is realizing that the point of having an ethical system isn't to deprive you of doing things that you want to do. It isn't to deprive you of living your best life or having a fun life. The purpose of following an ethical system or a moral system, recognizing what is non-virtuous and what is virtuous, and committing yourself to engage in virtuous behavior only, what that is doing, it is priming your mind and your body to point towards liberation, right? And if it feels burdensome, that's because we haven't done it. We've gotten so used to thinking my happiness is more important than your happiness. We've gotten so used to thinking that the way I perceive things is exactly as they exist. We've gotten so used to almost a nihilism, right? That says it doesn't matter if I lie or I steal or I cheat because everyone else is doing it anyway. We've gotten so accustomed to that that we don't see the harm it's doing to us, right? And so then trying to avoid it feels like it's harming us. But what we're really doing is setting ourselves free. It's like ripping off a band-aid, right? It feels harmful because what it is, maybe that's not the best analogy, I don't know. But it feels harmful because we're not accustomed to it. But then once we realize the validity of it, then it becomes joyful. Because then we see, even though it may be we exist in difficult circumstances, right? There's no denying that our physical suffering, especially, may be the cause of external circumstances that are outside of our control. There's no denying that. But the way we engage with it, the way our minds react to it, the way we exacerbate that physical suffering with emotional or mental suffering, that is within our control. And by following a spiritual moral code, what we're doing is avoiding that emotional suffering. Okay, we're recognizing that even if we can't avoid physical suffering, that isn't the real suffering that you experience. So stealing to accumulate wealth isn't actual happiness, right? All it's doing is setting ourselves up for more unhappiness. And when those things go away, we're left wanting even more, right? So we have tied our happiness to external phenomena. And we've used stealing, lying, manipulating, harming others as a way to accumulate more of these external things that we say are really going to cause us to be happy. So sometimes it is frustrating. You know, as a story I've told before, but sometimes a little knowledge can be frustrating because you know the right thing to do and you're so overwhelmed by your afflictions that you just don't want to do it. So an example is when I was still in Boston, I was living and working at Kurukula Center, which is one of the FPMT centers outside of Boston. And I don't remember the full context, but one of the people there that was a director at the time, or their former director, was a very good friend of mine. And there were some like higher ups in the FPMT coming around, people that I hadn't met before. And I expected him to introduce me to them and to kind of, usher me into meeting some of the old guard of the FPMT. And I expected him to do something else for me. I don't remember what it was, but it was a courtesy that I expected from him. Now, I never told him I expected him to do this, but it's what I would have done. And therefore, I just assumed he would do it. And then he didn't do it. And I took it very personally. I took it like he was personally attacking me. And it made me so upset. And I was in my room at the center, which is down in the basement. And I had this moment where, when you're so angry and you're so hurt that like you have just like tears running out of your eyes and you're not crying really, but you just can't control that balance of like rage and misery. And in the moment of that, I realized none of this is his fault. This is my fault. I expected him to do something that he didn't do. And I expected it of him without even asking it for him. And the fact that he didn't do it, that's not why I'm upset. It's because I created this unrealistic expectation, and then that unrealistic expectation wasn't met. All of this suffering I'm experiencing right now is my fault. It is my fault alone. Like I had that moment of realization, right? Which is really powerful, but in retrospect is powerful. In that moment, I was like, damn it. Like, why can't this be his fault? This is just easier if it's not my fault. Like realizing this is my fault didn't make it easier in that specific moment because I was so overwhelmed by my afflictions that I wanted to be angry. I wanted to be unhappy, right? Because, and knowing that this was my unhappiness was my own fault didn't make it better in that moment, right? But then once I got past that, then that moment was very helpful. So that moment of insight was very useful moving forward. But in the moment, it was hard to accept. Okay. So it happens that way. The more we learn, the more we study, the more we become familiar with these teachings, the more we realize that we've been engaging in bad habits that are only bringing us suffering. That's the truth. Okay. And they may be things that cause great suffering or small suffering. We don't realize it. But we've been doing things throughout our whole lives that have encouraged our own suffering without meaning to, but that's what we've been doing because we've been following the habit of chasing the self cherishing mind, of grasping at the self as if it truly exists. Excuse me. And so having the wisdom to realize that is difficult and can be painful sometimes. When you see that I've been harming myself, that can be painful and it can be frustrating, and you can want to just pretend you didn't have that wisdom. So that happens. It's a part of the process. What's important is to not get stuck on it. Okay. When it happens, you know what? We're human beings. We make mistakes all the time. I make mistakes every day, all the time. When those kind of things happen, you say, okay, this is the way it is. This is how I'm feeling right now. Give yourself a minute of a pity party and then move on. Okay. So frustration is understandable. What's important is to not let that hold you back, to not let that fear make you afraid of practicing the path. But when those moments come up, those are really powerful moments because it's a direct realization of how you are causing harm to yourself, and it gives you a direct opportunity to remedy that harm going forward. It's an insight into your own habits that you may not have had otherwise. So when you can have those moments, it's useful. It may not feel that way in the moment, but going forward, I can guarantee after that experience, I didn't have these unwarranted expectations from this person, especially without telling him, hey, can you do such and such? And because I didn't have that, I never experienced that level of discomfort or anger or frustration or sadness or rejection again, because I didn't create the conditions for it to occur, right? But I had to have that moment of realizing it first. So I think practicing the path of the Dharma is nothing but benefit. And if we can make every moment of our lives, whether we are watching TV or going to work or sitting on a meditation cushion, if we can make all of those moments infused with our spiritual understanding, our wish to become Buddhist, to benefit other sentient beings, to prioritize others' happiness more than our own, to recognize that the way we perceive things and the way things actually exist is not always concurrent. If we can bring those spiritual teachings and the spiritual ethical discipline to everything we do, it's only going to bring about joy and happiness in this life and in future lives. I truly believe that 100%, but it isn't easy to do. So we have to do the best we can do, and we have to recognize we're going to make mistakes, we're going to stumble, and sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable because we're going to be facing things that we don't want to face, because we're going to be facing bad habits that we didn't realize we had. But that's okay, because we have the power to get over those things. If we have confidence that the Dharma, a spiritual life, only brings joy, then that confidence allows us to bring it into everything we do. We develop that confidence by meditating, by analyzing all these teachings, analyze the vows. Why do the vows exist? Why do we claim these things about the 10 non-virtuous actions? What is being prevented by these things? Analyze them. Don't just accept them because the Buddha said them or because I said them. Analyze them and say, why are these considered non-virtuous? Why are we told to abandon these things? When we do that, what fills it? What comes in its place? And then once you have some conviction, then meditate on it, you know? And meditation, so we don't have any time for meditation today because we're ending early, but when you meditate on something, all of these things you can meditate on. Meditating isn't just following your breath. One type of meditation is to still the mind. That's called placement meditation. And it's important because our minds are running all over the place all the time, right? So we need placement meditation. But the other type of meditation is analytical meditation. And this is meditation where we are analyzing a topic or we're thinking of a specific thing, whether we are trying to generate the mind of compassion, or we can look at these vows. We can, once we have some conviction that the 10 non-virtues, for instance, are valid and that engaging in any of them is going to harm us, then you engage in meditation that focuses on the consequences of those 10 non-virtues, or you can pick one or two of them in your meditation to become familiar with it. And therefore, by abandoning the 10 non-virtues or engaging in the 10 virtuous actions, which are the opposite of the 10 non-virtues, you become familiar with that. It no longer becomes something you have to exert effort at because you first developed conviction in the validity of it, and then you meditated on it when you were in conditions that allowed you to become familiar with it, as opposed to when you were making a choice in your real life, right? So that's the benefit of meditating, is it makes this second nature. By bringing meditation into our lives, incorporating it into our everyday practice, what we're doing is eliminating the need to make decisions about these things because we've already made them second nature with our mind, right? We've made them one with our mind. So we need to do those 3 steps. We learn new material, we analyze it, we contemplate it, and then we meditate on it. So it becomes inseparable from our mind. So that when we're faced with an opportunity, we always lead with compassion. We always lead with wisdom. Those are going to be underpinning all of our actions. We don't have to think about it. Our immediate motivation is to free others from suffering in whatever way or means are available to us, which is not going to be the same for everyone, and it's not going to be the same for every circumstance, but the motivation should be the same, right? And the means will change. And the means comes from wisdom, right? So that's the point. Becoming familiar with these teachings. And that familiarity comes from understanding not just what they mean, but why they operate the way they do. And then everything we do can be mixed with Dharma. We don't have to relate it only to our meditation time, only to our teaching time. And then it becomes joyful. Then everything we do becomes infused with the joyful recognition that we are working towards the benefit of all sentient beings. Okay, I think I'll leave it there. We still have some time for questions. So are there any questions we want to go through? Anyone, you can just speak up. Go ahead.
So my one question was on purification of karmas. So I've been doing it as a daily practice, so the two aspects which I wanted to just check, which I have a doubt. So the 4 R's that we talk about in purification, the regret, refuge, remedy, and the resolve.
I think she just got jumped out.
Which are coming in
Okay.
either intentional or
We
unintentional.
couldn't
Oh,
hear you.
we-
There was a lag.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I have a
Yeah.
slight internet unstable. Yeah, it keeps going on. Can you hear me now?
Want to type
Yeah,
it
we've
out?
got you now. Yeah. Got you now.
Okay.
Do you want
So
to type
about
out your
purification. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead and repeat it. I heard up until the 4 powers. So what
Okay,
about the
yeah.
4 powers?
The 4 powers. To what extent, what level of enormity of a negative karma can this purification really work? That is the first aspect. And second is there are a lot of negative karma which are not really, I'm aware, which are still in my mind stream. So how do I purify them?
Yeah. So good questions. You know, so the question is about we have this purification process. We say there are the 4 opponent powers that can purify all of our negative actions. And the 4 opponent powers, the first one is reliance. So we generate refuge in bodhicitta. In response to the things that we've harmed, we either harmed sentient beings or Buddhas. So then we rely upon them to expunge that harm by generating a mind of refuge in bodhicitta. Then we develop a mind of regret. Mind of regret realizes that we engage in harmful actions. That's not the same as guilt, right? Guilt, at least in the Western idea of guilt, is saying I'm a bad person because I did this bad thing. That's not what we're doing. We're saying I did a harmful action that's going to have negative consequences for myself and others, and I regret it. I don't want to commit it again in the future. So we generate a mind of regret. Then we do a remedy. There are different remedies, such as the Vajrasattva mantra, reciting mantras. Really, any virtuous activity can serve as a remedy, but there are some that are considered more powerful than others. And then we have what's called resolve, where we commit to not engage in that harmful action again in the future. So these are the 4 opponent powers. So the truth is they're incredibly powerful, but we've created negative karma for so many lifetimes over and over and over again, right? That it's not to say don't do it. It's incredibly powerful. We should do it every day, especially because it prevents us from creating any more negative karma. So any negative things we've done that day, we can put the kibosh on it right away. So it's incredibly important for that regard. But the more we do it and the deeper those practice becomes, we are purifying past negative karmas as well, even if we don't have the active memory of them. Okay. So it's not all at once. It's not like we can do the practice once and then all of our negative karma is wiped away. It's not that easy. I wish it was. That would be great. But the deeper our practice gets and the stronger it gets, the more negative karma it's going to eliminate, right? And so when you generate the mind of regret, you don't only generate the mind of regret for actions that you have a cognizant memory of doing, but you recognize that in past lives, I've killed countless sentient beings. In past lives, I've engaged in countless non-virtues by stealing, by engaging in sexual misconduct, by lying, all these things, countless times. So actually try to generate a mind of regret with regard to those activities, even if you don't remember doing them, right? Because they came from your past lives. And the power of being able to generate actual regret for that is going to be in line with how much they purify. So if you don't actually have a regret for it, then it's not going to be purified, right? Because you actually have to have that mind of regret and the power of belief in the remedy that the remedy actually is purifying matters. If you don't actually believe this is useful and you're just going through the motions, then that also doesn't help, right? And then actually keeping the resolve not to do it again. So the more powerful each of the 4 opponent powers are, the more you're going to be able to karesana, eliminate, right? Or purify. Okay. Yeah.
Venerable, this is Alice speaking. I'm sorry, I'm not on camera today.
That's okay.
I have one clarification questions about keeping the vows purely, especially when it comes to things that you don't actively commit. Yeah. So on the example of killing, even if you avoid killing insects, and for example, if you live in India in one of the societies, there's an employee who's paid to every day go and fumigate all the mosquitoes on the ground floor and in the basement. So you may not have like actively commissioned it, but by you living there and paying the maintenance fees, it's being done on your behalf. Is that, or another example might be buying leather goods, which of course are also tied to there being an animal that was slaughtered to make the leather, right? So is that constituting breaking of the vow not to kill?
So it's important. It's a good question. It's important to distinguish between accumulating non-virtue and breaking a vow, which are slightly different but related, right? So for a vow to be broken, depending on the vow, but for the vow to be broken, it has to have an intentionality behind it, right? So if you don't intend to harm others, then if you don't intend to kill, then you're not breaking the vow not to kill, but you will cause the vow to degenerate, which is why you have to retake the vows. And it's the same with the karma itself, is that if I walk down the street and I step on insects, without even realizing they're there, I'm accumulating some negative karma. But that's not the same as if I saw them and stepped on them intentionally, right? The level of negative karma is going to be different depending on whether it's intentional or non-intentional. So it's similar with the vows that you have to intend to break the vows. If you do it accidentally, or if it's out of your control, then it isn't breaking the vows. It is possible that it is causing the vows to degenerate, so they're not as strong, but then you engage in a practice of taking the vows over again, and that renews them and re-strengthens them. So, we didn't talk about it, but when we look at the 10 negative actions, or the 10 non-virtues rather, in order to fully commit a non-virtuous action, there are 4 components, right? So for the instance, the act of killing, there are 4 components, which are the basis, the intention, the action itself, and the completion of the act. So in order to have a complete negative karma for the act of killing, it has to have the proper basis, which is another living being other than yourself. It has to have the intention, which is the wish to kill, generated or motivated by delusion. It has to have the actual deed, so you have to either go about the act of killing or telling someone else to kill on your behalf. And it has to have the completion, where that other being has to die before you do. If all 4 of those aren't there, it'll still be negative, but it won't be a complete negative action, right? And it's similar with the vows, that if all the pieces aren't there, it won't be broken completely, but it will be degenerated. Does that help?
Yes, thank you so much.
I do see a question in the chat that says, what is the formal process of taking refuge? So refuge itself, which is the distinction which makes us Buddhist, right? Accepting the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as valid sources of refuge, and recognizing there are no valid sources of refuge outside of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Having a mind that realizes that is what distinguishes us as Buddhists. So ultimately, refuge is an internal process. So if you are able to generate that mind completely and wholeheartedly, then you can consider yourself have taken refuge, that you can consider yourself a Buddhist. You don't need a formal ceremony. You don't need any external trappings. Now, there are ceremonies. It's a very simple ceremony that, at least in the Tibetan tradition, we do, that involves a teacher usually giving some advice about the 3 vows, about the 3 objects of refuge and what it means to hold them as objects of refuge. So there are certain things that you adopt and certain things you avoid when you look at the 3 objects of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as actual sources of refuge. So generally there is some teaching that's given, and then there is a ceremony where a teacher will officially grant you refuge, right? And sometimes they'll give you a refuge name. That is very common. So if you see a lot of people with Tibetan names, it's because they've received that. If they're not ordained, just lay people, they might have received that name during a refuge ceremony. So there is a formal official ceremony in that way, but it's not necessary. So if you are in an environment where you have access to a teacher and you request refuge from them and they offer it, then you can go through that ceremony. But if you don't have access to that, you can still generate a mind of refuge. And and it would still be valid, right? So that is a little bit about official process of taking refuge.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I have a question, Venerable.
Sure, go ahead, Pratibha.
Yes. So regarding the third vow, to not forgive others, but and hold grudge even if they have apologized. So, for example, if I am in my close circles, suppose if there is a person who keeps, who have some wrong intention or any criticism towards myself, and earlier I get angry, but later on I understand that why they are doing this to me. It's because whatever they're saying to me, whatever they're criticizing, it's because of their own insecurities, right? So in that process I start to understand, okay, they are saying these things because of their own insecurities, not against me. So I forgive them, you can say, but then it keeps on going repeatedly. Correct. So am I not allowed to hold a view against that person, or am I supposed to forgive them each and every time?
So yes, you should be forgiving them each and every time, right? But forgiving them isn't the same thing as encouraging their bad behavior. So if there is a way that you could engage in some behavior or do something that prevents them from engaging that behavior to protect yourself in some way, then that is perfectly acceptable, right? To engage in things to take yourself out of harm's way is 100% acceptable. But the recognition is if they harm you, whether you have taken those steps to prevent it or not, right? Them harming you is always coming from their own suffering. It's always coming from their own ignorance, their own misunderstanding of the nature of reality. And so to hold that against them and to hold a grudge because they harmed you is only going to harm you more. It's not going to benefit them. And you being angry at them isn't going to stop them from hurting you in the future, whatever it may be, right? So there may be ways to go about having a conversation with them or explaining like, this is harmful, this is causing me pain, please don't do it. But doing that in a way that's calm and trying to benefit them, or doing that in a way that's coming from your own anger, your own hurt, your own grievance, one of them will be more effective than the other, right? Just in a worldly sense. So unfortunately, yes, you do have to forgive them every time. But the beauty of that is by forgiving them, you don't carry that emotional baggage. Even if they're continuing to harm you, you have stopped creating more harm on top of it. Because all holding that grudge is doing is causing more harm to yourself.
Yes.
That the grudge isn't harming them, right?
Yes.
So the beauty of this vow, right? And this is kind of going into what I was trying to get at with this teaching, though I didn't quite maybe explain it as well as I wanted to. But the beauty of this vow, when you think about it, is the only thing a grudge does is it harms me. It encourages my anger. It encourages my resentment. It encourages all these negative feelings. It doesn't actually change the external situation in any way. And so by vowing not to hold a grudge, what I'm doing is I am teaching myself and I'm creating a path for myself to release that anger and to find the happiness that comes with having personal contentment and not letting other people's harm become an opportunity for me to then add on and create more harm for myself, right? So that's how this vow benefits us in that way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Got it.
Yeah.
Venerable, may I ask a related question to what
Yes,
Pratibha
please.
asked? So it would be perfectly acceptable to protect ourselves from the harmful situation or toxic situation and move ourselves away from it? Like, do we have to actively engage and explain or tell them why it's harming us, or is it okay to sometimes just withdraw from situations and disengage, because sometimes that seems to be the only option?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hesitant to make any blanket statements without specifics, but in general, I will say yes, it's perfectly acceptable to take steps to prevent your own to decrease the external causes of your own suffering, whether that mean disengaging from people, whether that mean cutting off contact with people. And you don't owe people an explanation if they're harming you, and this comes up a lot, especially with millennials whose parents hold highly different views than they do. Sometimes you have to cut off connections with your family. And this is not coming from a Buddhist perspective. This is coming from a mental health perspective. In order to preserve your own mental health, you have to cut off connections from your family. And they feel like that you owe them an explanation. You don't owe anyone an explanation. If what you're doing is to protect yourself and help yourself. Now, there are ways to go about doing that that are skillful and that are not skillful, and that's going to depend on the circumstance. And the important thing from a Buddhist point of view is that when you are making a decision like that, make sure that decision is always based in compassion and it isn't based on following the self-cherishing mind, right? So that is what is important. And if you can be sure that the way you go about cutting off communication or extricating yourself from difficult circumstances isn't because you think you're more important than others or your happiness is better than others, but instead you recognize that you need to create a level of safety around yourself if you hope to do any sort of inner work and be of benefit, then with the right motivation, then it's perfectly fine to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Makes sense. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah, it can be hard. It can be really hard, you know? And to be fair, sometimes we do feel like we owe people things. And the problem is people that are going out of their way to harm us, whether they mean to or not, right? That happens a lot with our family, is that they harm us, but they don't mean to. They think it's just part of the natural relationship. We feel like we owe them something, and that weighs on us, right? And so trying to find the balance of acting with compassion, but taking care of ourselves is a hard thing to do. The beauty of the teachings is the teachings recognize that, you know, for instance, I use this as an example all the time, but if you look at the teachings that teach us how to achieve calm abiding meditation, so how to achieve shamatha, single pointed meditation, when you've actually tamed your mind completely, then it doesn't matter where you are. You can be in the middle of the busiest city or the busiest market in the busiest city, and you can have instant perfect concentration, single pointed without any effort, right? Because you've done the work to tame your mind. So the external factors can't affect you at all. But what's the very first piece of advice we're given in the Lamrim when we are going to try to develop that mind? Go to an isolated place. That's the very first piece of advice. It recognizes that sometimes at the beginning of our practice, at the beginning of our journey, where we are right now, we are so dependent on external circumstances that we need to give ourselves the best opportunity to flourish that we can. And that's perfectly acceptable. And then as we progress on the path, then the external circumstances won't affect us as much. And then we can go back to other places where we have more difficult external circumstances, but we've already built up the inner resources that will allow us to deal with them in a healthier and more complete way. Right? So that's built right into the teachings. It says, yes, if you were a Buddha right now, it wouldn't matter what was happening to you outside of you. One of the characteristics of the Buddha that marks him as a perfect object of refuge is that he has indiscriminate compassion and love for all sentient beings. So there could be one being on one side giving him a massage with really beautiful scented oils, and another being on the other side stabbing him with a knife, and he would have the same amount of love and compassion for them equally. We aren't like that, right? We're not there yet. So we have to, it's perfectly acceptable to create positive conditions to allow us to progress on the path. And then as we've made progress, then we can go back to more difficult circumstances. So that's built right into the teachings, 100%. Anything else before yeah, go ahead.
That makes a lot of sense, because I think we're such relational beings that when we're around those relationships, it's hard for us to create those conditions of positivity. So withdrawing from that gives us an opportunity to build our inner, I think, space.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Good. Okay, if there aren't any more questions.
There are no more questions.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So there are no more questions. I think that we should, count our blessings that we made it through this whole session without me losing power or internet. So it's a good place to end right here where everything is still working well. So let us do some very brief dedication prayers. And so the reason we do dedication prayers is because we want our practice to be complete, right? So we made our practice virtuous in the beginning by setting a strong motivation. And then our practice was virtuous in the middle by actually engaging in an exploration of the Dharma and how it affects our lives. And we want our practice to be virtuous in the end by dedicating any merit we've accumulated to benefit others instead of keeping it for ourselves. So we recognize that by studying the teachings of the Buddha today, we've accumulated some good karma, some merit, and we generate the mind that wishes to give that merit away to others, that it may ripen on others, and that merit may result in us becoming Buddhas more and more quickly so that we might benefit others. Not for our own benefit, so that we might benefit others. So generate a mind of dedication that says, may any of this merit I've accumulated today be given away, may it ripen on others, that all other sentient beings may be free from all suffering. May all of our holy teachers, continue to show the aspect of leading long lives so they can continue to teach, they can continue to lead others out of suffering. And may all of those who are experiencing any sort of suffering be free from that. May they meet the teachings of the Buddha, and may they themselves travel on the path to liberation. And so with that mindset, let us recite a few very brief dedication prayers. So we'll do this first prayer once in Tibetan and then once in English. And then we'll do these next 2 verses, which are long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Or excuse me, 3 verses, I believe. Yeah, the next 3 verses, which are long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. But the first one we'll do once in Tibetan and then once in English. Choe Sum Ling Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyuchik Ke Wanyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gone Gondu Pe Wa Sho. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who makes extremely clear the path that is the unification of emptiness and compassion, to the lotus holder, Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. May the glorious Guru's lives be long and stable. May all beings equaling the extent of space have happiness. May I and others, without exception, accumulate merit and purify negativities, and may we be blessed to quickly attain Buddhahood. Great. Thank you all so much. I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to spend this time with you today. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Venerable, for coming and teaching us. Thank you.
That was wonderful.
And we'll all see you all next week at the center. Hopefully the orange alert has been lifted. And it's still very overcast today. So we hope that it's lifted and everyone is safe. Also, an appeal to everyone, please come to the center whenever you can. Our center is a very beautiful, humble, decent little center. If you have not been there, we'd love to give you a tour. And if you're in Bangalore, just call us up. We are one of the admins in the community, and you can come and visit us. Thank you also.
Thank you, CKSL.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is D. Sorry, not CKSL. My name is D. Nice to see you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Jesse Reddy Garo. Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you, Light Children 5D. All right, I'll be ending the session here.
Thank you, D.
Thank you for organizing this.
See you
Bye-bye.
next week.